You must be the driver. Perfect. I was hoping you'd be warm. We're going to be absolutely fine in that house, I can already tell. The story opens on the most delicious irony imaginable. Diamond Corson, brilliant, luminous, completely without pretense, settles into the passenger seat of the silver Bentley and begins talking to Tom Parker the way nobody has talked to him in 4 decades. Not since a brown-eyed girl in a campus garden smiled at something he said, entirely unbothered by his hunger for success, interested only in the man behind it. She has absolutely no idea that the name above the door she's about to walk through belongs to the quiet, silver-haired man behind the wheel. He was the billionaire who commanded every room he entered. She was the stranger who handed him her secrets because she thought he was just the driver. But as their 2 worlds fold into each other, a hidden truth is about to surface that could fracture a father's most sacred bond with his only daughter. Tom has spent 5 decades being Mr. Parker, a title that precedes him into every space like a polished announcement, keeping the world at a courteous arm's length. But today, he is behind the wheel of his own Bentley, indulging a rare, quiet impulse his assistant would file under inexplicable. To the woman climbing into his passenger seat, he is simply a composed older gentleman in pale linen with kind eyes and nowhere urgent to be, and Diamond treats him precisely that way. She has just landed for Fashion Week, carrying her sketchbooks, her ambitions, and a fierce, quiet refusal to be swallowed whole by a world built on inherited wealth. She fills the car with the kind of easy warmth that wants absolutely nothing in return. She vents gently about nerves. She laughs at her own overthinking. She leans toward him and promises, with total sincerity, that they will manage his difficult boss together, 2 ordinary people against the arrogance of old money. At 24, Tom loved someone who saw him the same way before the empire, before the name on the building. That woman has been gone for 46 years. And for 46 years, nobody has looked at him the way Diamond is looking at him right now, with pure, unscripted human curiosity. The irony reaches its peak the moment the Bentley rolls through the iron gates, and Diamond spots the brass lettering mounted above the entrance. Parker Estate. The warmth drains from her face in a single, clean sweep. Tom cuts the engine. He turns toward her with the patient, unhurried expression of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment, and says with quiet, unbothered warmth, "You did promise we'd be best friends." Diamond stepped out onto pale limestone and tilted her head back. The entrance was taller than her entire apartment block back home. Carved stone columns. Ivy that had been climbing longer than she had been breathing. And above the grand iron-framed doors, letters pressed in brass that she had completely missed on the way in because she had been too busy handing a stranger every unguarded thought in her head. Parker Estate. Her stomach made a long, slow drop toward the ground. She turned around. The silver-haired man was already watching her from beside the car, one hand resting easy on the door frame, those gray-blue eyes holding something that was trying very hard not to become a smile. He had not corrected her once. Not when she had called his employer insufferable. Not when she had declared she would be his ally against the man. Not even when she had touched his arm and whispered, "We'll get through this together." The front doors opened before a single word could form in her mouth. Diamond. Lydia came barefoot down the stone steps with her arms already open, all loose hair and genuine affection, pulling Diamond into a hug that smelled like jasmine and warmth. Then she spun around beaming toward the man by the car. "Daddy, she's here. Daddy." The word landed like a gavel. Diamond felt every drop of color leave her face at once. She looked at the driver, at Tom Parker, the billionaire, the estate owner, the father of her best friend in the world, and found him already watching her back with that same unhurried, unruffled calm that she now understood had never been humility. He tilted his head just slightly, and the ghost of a smile finally made it all the way to the surface. "You did promise," he said, low and warm, "that we would be best friends in this house." Diamond had absolutely nothing to offer in response. She found him on the east terrace just after 8 the next morning, her apology polished and slightly breathless. He was reading, silver hair catching the soft early light, and he looked up before she could even open her mouth, as though he had heard her coming and had already decided how this would end. "Before you say a word," he said, setting down his cup, "I slept better last night than I have in years." She laughed in spite of herself. The whole apology fell apart. He gestured to the chair across from him, patient as weather, and something about the stillness of that morning made it simple to sit and even simpler to stay. She had her sketchbook on her lap out of pure habit. She carried it everywhere the way some people carry their keys. He glanced at it the way perceptive people always do, with immediate, instinctive recognition. "Show me," he said, "just that. No performance of interest, no careful distance. Not what is it, or are you creative, or how lovely. Simply show me." So she did. She turned the pages slowly. Structured silhouettes. Evening pieces with handwritten notes crowding every margin. A recurring motif she hadn't quite found language for yet, asymmetric lines, fabrics that seemed to carry their own momentum, like water deciding where to go. He didn't perform enthusiastically. He looked at each page the way a man reads a contract he actually intends to honor. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't about talent. "You're designing for a woman who wants to fill a room and still keep something entirely for herself," he said. "That tension is very specific. Every enduring brand you have ever admired was built on exactly that contradiction." Diamond went still. "How do you," she began. He smiled quietly. 70 years, he said. "You learn to read what people make." She looked at him then, properly, and felt something shift in a direction she wasn't ready to name. It began with a look. Tom noticed it the way a careful man notices weather, quietly and with complete certainty. Marcus, his PA of 11 years, had developed a talent for being wherever Diamond happened to be, carrying her fabric samples in from the car, appearing at the kitchen island when she spread her work out across the counter, laughing a fraction too long at everything she said. Tom watched without comment. He signed papers. He took calls. He waited. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Marcus crossed a line that had never needed to be drawn out loud. Diamond stood at the tall east window holding a length of ivory fabric up against the light, and Marcus moved close behind her and said something that Kenny, passing through the corridor, caught only by its register. Low, warm, deliberate. The unmistakable tone of a man who has decided to take his chances. Diamond's response was a laugh, polite and retreating. The laugh of a woman buying herself distance without making a scene. Tom walked in. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply fixed Marcus with the kind of steady stillness that had dissolved boardroom arguments and ended partnerships in under 10 seconds and said, "That will be all for today." Marcus left without a syllable. The room resettled into quiet. Diamond turned from the window, silk still gathered in her hands, and found Tom standing closer than he usually permitted himself to stand. Something in his expression had come unmoored. The composed, careful architecture of it had shifted, and for once he looked every one of his years, and not one bit like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had very nearly let something irreplaceable slip between his fingers a second time. "I should explain myself," he said. "You really don't have to," she answered. "I want to," he said simply. He exhaled slowly. "I find myself completely, inconveniently unwilling to watch anyone else in this world be the reason you laugh like that." Diamond was quiet for a long moment. The silk caught the afternoon light between her fingers. Then she set it down on the windowsill, closed the 2 steps between them, and said softly, "The way you open a door rather than shut one, then don't." It wasn't a beginning anyone announced. It was simply the moment the private world became the real one. Tom Parker had not performed a single thing in 5 decades of business. Not a handshake, not a projection, not a smile. He was, by every available measure, a man constitutionally opposed to theater. And yet on a gray Thursday morning, he pressed the back of his hand to his forehead and told his housekeeper he was coming down with something. It wasn't entirely false. Something had loosened inside him, something warm and slightly reckless, and he didn't trust himself to be in the same room as Diamond Corson without every last bit of it showing plainly on his face. Claiming a cold was simply the most dignified solution available to a 70-year-old billionaire who had apparently misplaced his composure somewhere between her laughing at his ruined omelet and the moment she had hummed softly to herself over a design journal, completely unaware he was standing in the doorway watching. She came to check on him, naturally. That was the particular thing about Diamond. She couldn't help it. She appeared at his study door with ginger tea she had made herself in a house with a full kitchen staff, because she had wanted to make it. "You don't look very sick," she said, leaning against the frame and studying him with those quietly precise eyes. "I'm extraordinary when I'm well," he replied. "This is what deterioration looks like in a man of my caliber." She laughed that full, completely unguarded laugh, and the next 4 days quietly rearranged themselves around it. They cooked together in the evenings when Lydia was occupied with showroom appointments and fittings. the kitchen filling with the specific warmth of two people who have stopped editing themselves for each other. Diamond taught him a spice blend her grandmother had folded into her memory before she passed, and Tom stood closer than the lesson required, absorbing nothing about the spice blend and everything about the way she closed her eyes briefly when the aroma rose between them. He sang once, just a low, unhurried bar from something old, and she stopped stirring and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Not surprising. Something quieter than surprise. "You have a beautiful voice," she said. "I had the right reason to use it," he replied, and meant something else entirely. They both understood that. Lydia called every evening with the kind of breezy warmth that held something unspoken underneath it, the way a beautiful letter holds a difficult postscript. She had made her feelings plain weeks before. He was her father, not a man available for whatever this was, and certainly not a man who had any business looking at her best friend the way the last hour of daylight looks at everything it touches. Tom listened to her voice on the phone and watched Diamond across the kitchen island and felt, for the first time since he was 24 years old, that he was living fully inside for a moment rather than observing it from behind glass. He stopped pretending to be ill by Friday. He didn't stop any of the rest of it. Paris arrived the way secrets do, quietly and everywhere at once. Tom had described it as a business trip. 3 meetings in the 8th arrondissement, a dinner with an investment group, all perfectly legitimate, perfectly documented. His assistant had the itinerary. Lydia had the reassurance. What neither of them had was the truth, that he had booked 2 suites at a small, extraordinary hotel on the Isle St. Louis with the particular unspoken understanding that Diamond's sketches required the same northern light that the sitting room windows offered, and that he needed her near it. She knew. She packed her portfolio regardless. They didn't name any of it on the flight. They talked about everything else instead. The particular stubbornness of French tailoring. Whether mastery could be built entirely from obsession. What a city owes to the people who fall in love inside its borders. Diamond laughed somewhere over the Alps, and Tom folded the sound away somewhere careful and private. The meetings were brief. Afterward, he took her to a brasserie near the Palais Royal where no one looked twice at him, and she ordered in imperfect, confident French, and the waiter responded the way everyone always did, with instant, helpless warmth. She spread her newest sketches across the table between the wine and the bread, and he didn't offer money or connections. He offered the rarest thing he owned, complete, unhurried attention, asking questions that proved he had been listening for weeks. She watched his face as he studied the lines of a gown she had never shown anyone, and something shifted beneath her sternum, slow and permanent. It wasn't the candlelight. It wasn't Paris. It was the way he looked at her work. Exactly the way he looked at her. Like something worth every year he had left, she reached across the sketches and covered his hand with hers. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and luminous, doing what Paris has always done best, making the inevitable feel like it was your own idea. The cove outside had no name on any map Tom kept, which was precisely why he had chosen it. The Mediterranean moved slowly and silver beyond the pine line. And Diamond stood barefoot at the water's edge with her sandals dangling from 2 fingers, laughing at something he had said about Parisian taxi drivers. The sound of it moved through him the way warm light moves through old amber, slow and golden, and impossible to release. He had kissed her beneath the fig tree 20 minutes before, his hand cradling her face the way a man holds something he is already afraid of losing. She had kissed him back without hesitation and without apology, and he had felt, for the first time in 46 years, like a man standing at the opening of something rather than its quiet conclusion. He did not hear the footsteps. "Daddy." The word fell from a great height. Tom turned. His daughter stood at the edge of the shade in the white linen dress she had worn to dinner, her face attempting the impossible task of not breaking completely. Her eyes moved from her father to her best friend and back again with a slow, terrible precision. Diamond went absolutely still. The silence stretched long enough to become its own wound. "Daddy." Lydia's voice was softer the second time, which made it somehow far worse. "Tell me I'm misreading this." He could not. What followed wasn't a scene. It was something more precise than that. Lydia's voice stayed low and controlled and completely devastating, each word set down with the accuracy of someone who needed no rehearsal. She turned to Diamond once, briefly, with an expression that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but was somehow the full weight of both at once. Then she turned back to her father. Choose. Just that one word, suspended in the salt air between all three of them like smoke that won't clear. Tom looked at Diamond. Her chin was lifted, her eyes steady, offering him nothing that resembled permission to surrender himself on her behalf. He felt the most familiar ache of his life rise through him like a tide coming in. Go inside, he said to Diamond, his voice barely a sound. Please, he chose his daughter. The Florida sun had no right being that relentless. Tom watched it pour through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, then turned back to the papers that had been waiting 3 weeks for his attention and found he had none to give them. He had built this house around its silence. He had always loved that silence. Now it moved through every corridor like something that had wandered too far from home. Lydia had been watching him for 11 days, filing the small surrenders, the untouched glass of scotch. The garden chair where he used to spend whole slow hours reading, now simply standing empty. The way he answered her questions fully, gently, without a single warm syllable behind any of it. Her father had always been a man of deliberate quiet. This was entirely different. This was a man who had simply gone dim. She told herself she had done the right thing. She told herself 4 or 5 times daily, the way you repeat something you are not sure you believe. On the 12th evening, she set down her fork at dinner and looked at him, truly looked, and felt the floor move quietly beneath her. His silver hair caught the candlelight. His jaw held that patience she had read her entire life as contentment. But his eyes, those gray-blue, searching eyes that had always carried something private in their depths, were simply still. Not peaceful. Still the way a clock is still when it has stopped. I did this, she thought. The realization came without announcement, the way the heaviest ones always do. She had spent 28 years as the most important person in this man's world, and had never once asked what it cost him to hold that arrangement in place. He had given her everything without exception, his time, his name, his completely undefended heart, and when he had finally, quietly reached toward something for himself, she had reduced it to a single word. Choose. He had chosen her. She was no longer certain she deserved it. The estate had never looked quite like this. Every chandelier is at full brightness. The grand terrace banked in white orchids. The particular quality of laughter that only fills a room when the people inside it genuinely love the person being celebrated. Lydia had arranged everything herself, not through a single assistant or coordinator. Herself, the flowers, the caterers, the music. Her hands had been unsteady on the last and most important phone call. Tom came through the double doors in his navy linen, silver hair swept back, entirely certain he was walking into a quiet family dinner. He stopped when he saw the room. Old friends, cousins, people who had been present at the beginning, watching him build something improbable from a single unyielding conviction. They broke into noise. He laughed, the real kind, the kind that climbed all the way to his eyes and lived there. Lydia crossed the room and took both his hands. Happy birthday, Daddy. He searched her face. Something in it was different, lighter, the expression of a woman who has finally set down something she had been carrying too long. I have one more gift, she said quietly, and nodded toward the far end of the terrace. He turned. Diamond stood at the edge of the gathering in deep emerald, her dark hair loose over one shoulder, her eyes finding his the instant he looked. She wasn't smiling yet. Neither was he. The entire terrace seemed to hold a breath it hadn't known it was keeping. He walked toward her the way a man walks when he has stopped caring entirely about appearances and started caring only about what is actually true. She met him in the middle. You're here, he said. Lydia called me, she answered softly. She said her father hadn't laughed, not really laughed, since Paris. He raised his hand and touched her face with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent 46 years learning the difference between a life that simply continues and a life that is genuinely lived. When he kissed her, the terrace erupted for the second time that evening, warmer this time, full of something that sounded less like applause and more like relief. Lydia watched from across the terrace, one hand pressed to her lips, her eyes bright. Some gifts, she understood now, you give only when you finally reckon honestly with the cost of keeping them. At 70, Tom Parker learned that the most valuable thing a man can possess is not a name above a door, not an empire built from nothing, not a legacy pressed in brass. It is the uncommon courage to reach toward happiness a second time, knowing exactly what it costs and choosing it anyway. From a stranger in a passenger seat to the love of a lifetime, Diamond and Tom proved that the heart does not run on a schedule. It runs on instinct, and it knows where it belongs. If their story stayed with you, give it a like and let us know in the comments. If you believe real love is worth the wait, no matter how long that wait turns out to be, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Comment second chance below if you believe Tom made the only choice that ever really mattered.